of London's Calling. I think you're here for one of three reasons. Either you've mistaken us for Keir, as we just said, or you're here to get an early seat for Peter Coffey, who's coming up after us, or maybe, just maybe, you're here for the Admin 10 Commandments. So before we go into looking at those, some introductions. So that's me. My name's Chris Edwards. I'm a Salesforce MVP and one of the organisers of the London Admin User Group. I've been working on the platform for about 6 years, more recently as a consultant, but before that, 5 of those years were as an admin. So, this is an audience and topics that are very close to my heart. This is my friend Britney Spears.
Cheers, Chris. Okay, that's me, Mike Gill. So I'm very similar to Chris. I'm a Salesforce MVP and one of the organisers as well of the London Admin User Group. Together we write a blog called Salesforce Weekly. On that blog, we're currently running a series, which is why we're here today, called the Admin Commandments. It's not an entirely new concept. Someone you know very well, Francis Pinder and Kevin Poorman, came up with the Apex 10 Commandments. So being the organisers of the London Admin User Group, we jumped on the opportunity to give you the Admin 10 Commandments.
So without too much further ado, we're going to get straight into those commandments. It's going to be a little bit like the demo jam earlier. We're going to have to pack in quite a lot into a short space of time. But before we do that, it's not just Mike and I here today. We wanted to come up with a persona or a voice, if you like, to be the angel on our shoulder. So in a previous incarnation of a 10 Commandment series we did around release readiness, we came up with an idea of mocking up a very crude image of someone I like to call Moses Benioff, who is going to be delivering the commandments to us from his tablets, but they're not stone tablets, they're iPads, of course. So we asked Salesforce for permission to use that image. They said no. So we're not going to fall into that trap again. And this time we've done something completely different, which is that we haven't asked for permission. So you don't ask, they can't say no.
Yeah.
So here's Moses Benioff talking us through the Admin 10 Commandments, starting with, as is traditional, number 1.
Okay, let's get this show on the road. So the first admin commandment is, as an awesome admin, always create fields in a standardized way. In other words, what we're saying here is use a bit of common sense as you go about building your Salesforce org. So where should you start with this common sense? Well, you should start by always completing the description and help text. Now, I'll tell you a bit of story. The current company, when I arrived there, I was often sitting in a meeting going through objects that had in excess of 200 fields, and not one of them had the description or the help text field populated. So these fields are very important. The description field is a reminder to you and anyone managing the system as to why that field's there. The help text should be obvious. It's to help your users. And if you don't fill it, if you don't fill that help text field, they're probably there cursing you, hence this graphic. Next bit. Okay, but it's so much more than just those two fields. As you're going about thinking about a standard and the conventions that you want to follow in your Salesforce org, you need to be looking at these areas as well. So field and objects, you can extend this common sense to these objects, things like profiles, roles, reports and dashboards. This is one that sneaks up on you. The reports and dashboards starts off as 10, starts off very small, everyone knows what they're doing. And then you turn your back and then turn around 3 months later and you've got 150 reports to manage. No one knows what report they're using, dashboard they need to look for the details that they need. So like I say, it's good here to have a suitable convention standard that you follow. Similarly with the automation stuff, if you've seen any of the process builder talks, there's a description field in there, workflows, there's a description field as well. Okay, so what we're really saying here is we're trying to save you time. This is the single most easiest way to save you time, both yourself and your users, and ultimately drive adoption. So if you make one Salesforce, sorry, it's a bit late for making a resolution, we're in February, but if you make one Salesforce resolution, make it this one to put those bad habits to rest. Okay, so let's move on. So awesome admin commandment number 2. This one might shock you a bit. So we want you to back up, an awesome admin must back up their org data, because in a lot of ways, Salesforce is like any other system that you have and manage. Okay, why do we say this? Well, this is perhaps the most overlooked part of the Salesforce universe. Why? Because we take for granted that Salesforce have us covered. The system's always there when we come to log in. There's no issues with that. But should we extend that same trust to our users? So perhaps you haven't thought about these scenarios, and these are the scenarios where a backup solution could help you. So careless or disgruntled users with delete permissions. So you've terminated someone early and they go ahead and delete a load of opportunities. If you had a backup, you'd be fine. A poorly designed business process, Now, of course, processes start off well designed, but you don't necessarily think of everything. 3 months down the line, something else changes. That means that process then starts doing doing stuff that you don't expect. So a backup solution would help in that scenario. Rogue apps and integrated systems performing DML. So you have to kind of think outside of Salesforce as well. Anything that's changing data, if you want to get back to that state, if you don't have a backup, you can't. An Apex running in God mode, very similar. A normal user could trigger something that could change data. So these are all examples of where a backup solution could help you. So what options do you have? Well, on the App Exchange, there's actually quite a few apps. There's more apps than you realize covered to backing up Salesforce data. Okay, so as well as that, you can actually build your own backup through batch. You can create a batch process that dumps out your data and puts it somewhere. Or at the very least, if you don't do anything and you remember only one thing from this slide, if you schedule the weekly the weekly data export, just don't forget to click on the link to download your data.
Thanks, Mike. On to our third commandment, which is that admins should position themselves between IT and the business. Sometimes that middle seat is the best place to be. So one of the questions that admins tend to ask other admins is, what's your job title? Or is administrator the right word for what it is we do? And for me, that leads on to another question, which is, which department do you report to? And I think if you ask a number of admins that question, you'll get different answers. And that tells us that different companies really see Salesforce as being seated in different areas of their business. So why is that? Why isn't it a clear-cut answer? Because clearly it's a technical role. We're all technologists in this room today, but unlike some technology, and probably most technology roles, it has a very visible, a highly visible, immediate impact on the core business, so whether that's sales or marketing or operations or service. And to me, what that means is that we administrators really find ourselves kind of equidistant between the technology organization and the wider business. But rather than saying, well, we're slipping through with the cracks and we're neither one thing or the other, we tend to find, hopefully you'll agree, that we're kind of equally respected by both parts. And that really gives us a really important seat at the table, where we are seen as an independent, technologist, an impartial party, if you like, but with impact over and influence over core business decisions and strategy. So do what you can to keep a foot in both of those camps. It could be that the business wants you to become an IT person, report into IT. That's fine if it works for you, but definitely fight for your place at the table to make sure you're involved in those key business decisions. And equally, if they want you to go into the core business and report to sales or marketing or ops, then maintain that position as a technologist and as a kind of an impartial advisor almost. This leads us on to our fourth, which is that admin should know the value of both clicks and of code, because once we've got our seat at the table, we don't want to throw it away. So another question that goes around the ecosystem is, how much code does an admin need to know? And sometimes it's phrased as, how much code does an admin know before they're not an admin anymore and they're more of a developer or an analyst programmer? And to us, actually, the answer is that it's not about how much code we know. We could quite simply know zero, but it's definitely about knowing the pluses and minuses of both clicks and of code. Now, as admins, we're working with clicks day in, day out, so we know the pluses and minuses of clicks pretty well. But when it comes to code, you might find there's a temptation to stay a little bit blind to that. So if a business asks you to satisfy a requirement, you might say, well, I know that clicks can't do that. And you might come up with two follow-up statements. So maybe code can, I don't know, not my problem, not my area, speak to a developer. Or you might say, well, clicks can't do it, and therefore I'm going to tell you it's not worth doing. Now, both of those responses are pretty foolish. In the second one, you're hampering your business by saying, I'm not going to satisfy that requirement for you. But in the first one, you're doing something that's perhaps even more of a sin. You're throwing away your position, your seat at the table. You should be your org's gatekeeper, so the person they turn to when they know, how to achieve something. So really what we're recommending in this commandment is try to keep that seat at the table by getting code. It doesn't mean you need to know how to write a single line of code, but understand kind of when and how it's used. Of course, now with some of the new tools like Process Builder, we as admins can harness the power of that code even more. And one of the ways we can do that is we can now separate the when from the what of that coding logic. So let's say a developer writes a very complex Apex class that performs an outbound systems integration. We can trigger that class in Process Builder to remain in control of when it fires. Quite often, businesses tell you something's true, and then actually the requirement changes, and they say, oh, I don't want to do it for every case, only for cases for key accounts, for example. So really what we're saying here is the best admins amongst us will know, when code is required, how that code is going to be used and maintained, and how they can remain in control of when and how it fires.
All right, thank you, Chris. Okay, so let's move on swiftly. So admin commandment number 5, use the sandbox for making changes. Resist that temptation for delayed gratification. In fact, I think I heard Matt use delayed gratification in his presentation. Okay, so what do we mean by this? It's obvious one, we know that. We understand the temptation. You probably heard this line, Salesforce is the easiest system to change, but it's the easiest system to up as well. So you have to be really, really careful. What's wrong with simply just diving into production and start making changes on the fly? Well, let me ask you this question. We're all kind of app builders to a certain extent. You know, would you go out and buy an app or even a car as another example if you knew it wasn't safe or not tested? So the same logic applies here. But what we're saying is there are stuff that you can do in production. So examples of things that you can do in production are business as usual activities. So things like user management, creating users, resetting passwords, all of that kind of stuff. Reports and dashboards, this is okay as well. So if your CEO says, I need a new sales line pipeline report, of course, you want to give him that. You don't want to say, hold on a sec while I go into the sandbox, build it, and then move it into production. But the things that we really are concerned about and the things that you shouldn't just be creating in production are things like processes, flows, and workflow rules. All of those kind of things have to be tested. They start off very simple, but they grow very quickly into something that needs testing, absolutely. You don't want to be building a workflow rule to send emails to people on renewals and do that straight in production if their renewal isn't due. You can also extend that to objects, fields, and layouts. So that's another good one. You don't want a sales rep using a field that you didn't intend to release just because you're messing around in production. Then the last one on the list is profiles, roles, and security. This one's probably the most important because now we're starting to put more and more information in Salesforce. Chances are we're putting really sensitive data in there. So if you think about it, if you're messing around with security in production and a group of employees see a load of stuff that they shouldn't see, that could have serious ramifications. Equally, imagine this. Imagine it's something on the community side and you expose all internal sensitive information out to the community. So you absolutely must do it in the sandbox. So that's really the key message here at the end is if you have a sandbox, just use it. Okay? All right, so on with admin commandment number 6, be ready for the next release. So you know that Salesforce give us 3 releases a year, spring, summer, and winter. Okay, so how much attention as admins do you need to pay to each release? You shouldn't see this just as a challenge to try and understand it all. You should see it as an opportunity to learn about things that are changing and the new things that are coming in, such as Lightning. So what should you do to be ready for each release? So Chris and I have been privileged enough to work with the success community guys on the release readiness webinars. And as part of that, we built out another commandment series called the Release Ready 10 Commandments. And obviously, we're restricted on time today, so I'm going to have to go through this very quickly. But this is the checklist that we take through during that group. So the first thing on that is know the release schedule and the key days. This is simply a blog that Salesforce posts that has all the details you need to know. One bit of information on there is when the release notes will be available. So once you have the release notes, you need to go online and read them, not print them out like you may have done in the past. The features are getting quite large now, so it's quite difficult to print them out. So the other benefit of looking online is you can apply some nifty little filters and determine what will impact your org. And you can actually then pay special attention to the things that will be auto-enabled. These are the things that if you don't do any testing, you don't know about the releases as an example, will hit your org automatically. So the next thing you need to do is learn from the community. I've already mentioned that Chris and I work with the release readiness team. There is a huge community out there dedicated to looking at each release. There's also users like you guys out there going through the same thing. You're not alone. You don't need to be in a dark room. So what do you do to get your hands on the pre-release? You've got 2 ways of getting it. So you can get it in a pre-release org, which is a standalone developer org, where you can try out all of the features away from your normal stuff. You can also get it in your sandbox. So once you have it in your sandbox, if you have time, the most important thing to do is test your customizations. And if you can't test everything, because we understand that testing is quite involved, you should test the areas that are the most highly customized in your org. Okay? So the next thing is make your users care, but only if you want them to. So what we're really saying here is manage their expectations carefully. So as a user, they care about what's changing in their job and what's changing in the system that they're using, but do they really care about data pipeline or Apex APIs and all that kind of stuff? Probably not. So you need to manage their expectations carefully. You want to try and learn to love the release. It comes 3 times a year. Like I said, get involved. Don't be on your own. Build it into your company's culture. Also, think outside in the success community and get involved. It's a great opportunity to see where Salesforce is going and align it with your own objectives. And if you've got that all under control, you can rest on the 7th day because it's not long until the next release.
Okay, so our 7th commandment, as you can probably tell from the image and the heading here, I want to talk about Trailhead, but I want to also talk about the wider concept of learning and why learning matters. So, firstly, if anyone isn't using Trailhead yet, key message, do it, do it, do it. It's an easy and fun way to learn Salesforce features, but for me what's really important is it's not just about learning them, it's about practicing and validating that learning as well. But whether you learn through Trailhead or whether you learn from other resources, and we'll come on to what those could be on the next commandment, the important thing is keep learning, because clearly learning has direct, obvious benefits to us. So let's start with the obvious ones. We can use new knowledge to plug any gaps we might have. Even if you are the absolute king or queen of Sales Cloud, there might be a few sales features you don't use, and equally there's going to be a bunch of stuff on the service or marketing or analytics side that you maybe have never touched. Mike mentioned the releases there. Trailhead has a great way of keeping up to date with new and enhanced features as well. And for me, what it really does is it equips us for the next change or the next challenge. And that change or challenge could be our org adopting a new feature, or it could be that we move on to a different org. But what I want to really hone in on here is that learning doesn't just help us, it helps us to help others. So those others could be the users in our org, and we'll come on to that in a moment. They could be other professionals on Success Community or on Askforce, for example. And one thing that I'm really keen on is what I call teaching by translation. What I mean by this is effectively different people learn the same thing in different ways. So if you are, for example, looking to learn the difference between profiles and roles, and you're the kind of person that easily understands access to rows and columns in a database table, great, that might work for you. Once you know that, though, try and translate it. Try and present it to others in a different way that might help them. So profiles and roles is the difference between holding a driving license and having the keys to a car, for example. Why would we go about helping others other than pure altruism? Well, it helps us because effectively by teaching others how to do things, we're giving them the gift of self-sufficiency. And especially if they are the users in our own org, that gift works 2 ways. What it means is we can move ourselves from being fairly reactive help desk style admins to actually spending more time being proactive and concentrating on advancements and enhancements to our org. Of course, there's going to be a limit. They're not going to want to learn everything you could teach them, and you're probably not going to want to give away all your secrets either. But the key message is keep learning wherever you can and also find ways to pay that forward. So this leads us on to number 8, which is caring about the community. So we talked about learning on the last slide, and it's not just Trailhead. There are a lot of community resources out there where we can go to learn as well. It's not also just learning, though. In the community, we'll find places we can network, help others, and have fun while we're doing it. So we're just going to pick out a couple of areas of the community. It's a huge, vast resource, so we're not going to spend too long on it. User groups, I don't feel the need to talk about user groups in any great detail today because you're all here, so you will get the benefit of in-person community events. But I just want to pick out London as an example. We're lucky here that we've got, I think, at least 4 different types of user group in this city. So whatever kind of admin you are, whatever org you work for, there'll be something there for you. Success community. Recently reached 2 million members, and that's the hashtag for celebrating that, by the way, Success2M. So again, I'm not going to spend much detail here because you probably all know it, but just to pick out a couple of areas. Answers. We know Answers as the place to go to ask questions. My commandment to you really is go and answer questions. Go and find out what other people want to know. There'll be some stuff you know already and you can help them instantly. There'll be a lot more where you learn yourself by helping that person out. Known issues as well is a fairly hidden area of success in that we tend to only use it reactively as admins. So when something's going wrong, we'll have a look at why did that go wrong, what do we need to do, what are the workarounds. Try and use it proactively. If anyone saw Peter Chittum's session earlier on if this then that, there's a great if recipe you can build that fires known issues into your inbox or into a text message so you can keep on top of those. Of course, it's not just the official resources. There's plenty else like Stack Exchange, Askforce, and much, much more that are out there as well.
Okay, thanks, Chris. All right, we're almost there. Admin commandment number 9. So beware of data nasties. Securing your org and data for more reasons than you think. So obviously this is about security, but security is an inside-out job. So from the outside, it's about getting the IP restrictions, the logging hours, the password policy tuned properly, but that's only one part of it. That's the outside. What goes on the inside is what we're really concerned with here. So what else do you need to think about? So you need to think about giving users the correct profile, making sure they have a profile that gives them the ability to do their job, but not gives them stuff that they don't necessarily use where they could do harm. Restricting users with delete permissions. You've got to watch this one as well. There's no real reason for anyone other than admins to have delete permissions. And as we move on, remembering to remove temporary permission sets. So we understand that people need stuff maybe to do some cleanup or some changes as a one-off exercise. Just remember that you need to remove it afterwards. Deactivating users who have left the company. Incredible but true. I've worked with many consultants that still have access to their previous company's orgs. So you really should be deactivating them. Okay, but it's not just about security. You want to be thinking data quality too. So preventing duplicate data by tuning your security sharing model. What you don't want is a user staring at 18 versions of the same account, as an example. You want to be restricting users with edit read-only rights. To be honest, there's a strong argument for nobody to have this. If a field is intended to be read-only, it should be read-only all the time. What you don't want is some new admin not forgetting that they have that permission and editing a read-only field and changing the data. And then the last one on our list here is if you're building out processes that require you to deactivate validation rules all the time, then it's probably not a good process. You know, validation rules are designed to protect your data quality, right? So if you have to disable it every week to do something, should it really be there? Is the process right? And this all really sits under the security and the protection of your org.
Okay.
Thank you.
So on to our final commandment, which is that you should break these rules. Well, some of the rules, some of the time. Before there's too many groans coming from the audience, this isn't a complete cop-out. We're not saying the previous 9 rule useless and the only rule is that there are no rules. What we're saying, though, is use these commandments really as a guide rather than as your one true gospel. Because remember, at all times, you're in control. You're in control of how you apply these rules. That's because you're in control of your org, your processes, and ultimately your career. We know, or we think that you should know the rules and then choose when to stick with them because we know it's not always black and white. When I was building this slide, I thought about putting in the phrase shades of grey, but it just means something different now, doesn't it? So let's put that in as an analogy. Let's say you're driving along a deserted motorway and you make the decision to exceed the speed limit by 10 miles an hour. Compare that with you driving past a busy school and there's a speed camera behind you. Would you still make the same decision to exceed the speed limit by 10 miles an hour? They're both the same crime, very different circumstances, very, very different potential repercussions. Let's turn that back to the commandments that we've talked through today, though. Say, for example, you find yourself in the position where you shy away from being seen as an IT person. You want to identify solely with the business. Maybe you want to make a change to a workflow in production. Maybe you say you haven't got time to read the release notes or to attend all of your user groups. Perhaps you want to only teach your users explicitly what they need to know for their job description and actually keep every other process, yourself. Maybe there is a situation where you do want to give a user that edit read-only fields permission. And guess what? These are all fine. If you have the right situation and the right reasons, you can apply these rules how you like. So the key message, you learn the rules and apply them where they benefit you. One thing I'll say, though, bear in mind a lot of what we talked about today are the kind of things where you're putting the extra effort in up front, and that is going to be what we talked about it earlier, delayed gratification. Do the right thing now to get the right benefit later. That's what makes us awesome admins. There's one other thing that makes a good admin, which is knowing when to shut up and let Peter Coffey have a go on this stage. So we'll turn it over to Q&A, and thank you very much. Good stuff.